This is Natasha, and I'm here with another story about the fugitive monkey, Theo. As you may know, Theo fights crime and stands up for justice. It's just unfortunate that the police mistakenly believe that he is a criminal. In this story, his name gets mixed up in a serious robbery. The secret mail train was hurtling across the country. When I say secret, what I mean is that only a very few people were supposed to know that it made this journey at all. At each stop along the way, it picks up sacks of used banknotes. That was the sort of information that could prove very costly should it fall into the wrong hands. At 2 a.m. on a dark and bitter morning, two men stood on the top of the bridge. "There she comes," said one, "right on time, though you wouldn't find her anywhere in the official schedules." The train's horn blared as the secret mail service whooshed and rattled beneath the men's feet. One of these shady characters was a gangland boss. The other was somebody we have met before, a criminal zookeeper called Mr. Grabber. "So our only little problem is this," sighed the gangland boss. "How do we stop a train that's travelling at 100 miles per hour? Is that something you can solve for us, Timmy boy?" Tim was Mr. Grabber's first name. He really didn't like being called Timmy boy, but he felt it would not be wise to complain about it in such company. All he said was, "Sure, can do. For the right price." A month later, the train was again speeding south with its cargo of cash. It was on a long straight stretch of track where it could run flat out at maximum speed. "Hey, what's that up ahead?" asked the guard. "Not sure," said the driver, pulling a long lever. A large pink object, luminous in the moonlight, was blocking the track. The brakes of the train were screeching. It was going to stop before it reached the obstruction, but only just. "Mick, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" asked the driver. The guard gaped with his mouth open before he could reply. "Well, if you can tell me with your hand on your heart that you are looking at a pink elephant, then yes I am, and I swear I haven't touched a drop all evening." The elephant was holding up his trunk like a policeman directing the traffic. The train came to a halt, and for almost a minute there was a pregnant silence. Then, suddenly, there came a banging and a scratching on the roof and the sides of the train. "Holy moly!" said Mick the guard. "What's that?" They could not see that a gang of monkeys had jumped off the verge of the railway and were now dancing and jumping up and down on the roof of the train. The first hint of what was happening came when a hairy upside-down face peered through the front window. A long arm reached down and pulled off the windscreen wiper. The driver was frantically yelling on his radio to the signal control centre. "This is Service 101. A pink elephant is blocking the track and we are being attacked by monkeys." "Come again?" was the reply. Two small explosions blew open the sides of the mail cars. The well-trained monkeys jumped down and formed a line. Soon they were passing mail sacks from one to another, then up onto a saddle on the back of the elephant. The sort of elephant saddle they use in India. When the saddle was full, they filled up a sledge behind him. 15 minutes later, the job was done, and the elephant waved his trunk and stomped up the grassy bank. On the other side, a huge circus track was waiting to transport him and the sacks away. By the time the police had arrived on the scene of the crime, first by helicopter and then much later in cars, the animal gang was long gone. They had already joined the long stream of juggernauts heading for the city and were indistinguishable from any of them. The robbery was a sensation. "Animal heist," screamed the headlines, and then in bold print, "Theo the simian master criminal is #1 suspect." Tucked up in his lair inside the city park, Theo heard the news over his radio during the breakfast show. There can be little doubt," he said to himself ruefully, "that once again I have been set up by Mr. Grabber." Later that morning, Theo swung over the rooftops to the street markets, where a friendly storeholder normally gave him apples and bananas, but today the man shook his head. "You've been a naughty boy," he said. "I should really hand you over to the cops." Theo let out a and the storeholder, who was really quite a sensitive fellow, understood what Theo meant by that plaintive cry. "If I had just stolen several £1,000,000 in used banknotes, why would I be here begging for bananas?" And so Theo did not go hungry that morning. Around about the same time, the mayor was on the telephone to the chief of the city police to give him a hot blast of his wrath. "How much longer are you going to let that fugitive ape make a monkey out of us?" he was demanding to know. "This is getting serious. There will be questions in Parliament." When Theo returned to his lair, the radio airwaves were still humming with excitement. The mid-morning phone-in programme featured 2 expert pundits. One was an animal psychologist who was saying, "This spate of criminal activity shows that apes are even more intelligent than has been generally recognised in the past." The second so-called expert was someone who had many years of day-to-day experience handling monkeys. He was none other than the former head of apes at the city zoo, now promoted to managing director. "Oh, that Mr. Grabber gets everywhere," said Theo crossly. A caller from the general public wanted to know what monkeys would do with sacks of cash. "I'm sorry to say," said Mr. Grabber, "that they will probably use the money to stuff their nests." The animal psychologist strongly disagreed. "Monkeys are rapidly evolving into a far more sophisticated species. It is clear that this Theo, whom the police say is directing these criminal operations, has an intellect on a par with the best human hooligan." "But do you think he has a sense of humour?" asked the show's presenter and host, who was called Jenny Pushy. "Is it at all possible that he is trying to show up the authorities as a bunch of incompetent fools?" "Well, the use of a pink elephant would suggest that he's having a bit of a joke," agreed the psychologist. "And I expect he enjoys staying 10 steps ahead of the blundering police force." Theo was listening to all of this with a sense of dismay. "Why can't they see that a human being is behind this?" he thought to himself. "Surely they know that monkeys don't need money." Back at the zoo, the monkeys were enjoying their reward. Double rations of bananas, and they had very little understanding that they had helped Mr. Grabber and his gangland friends to rake away a small fortune. Money meant nothing to them. But apes do have their pride, and can even be made to feel ashamed. Late one night, they were woken by a loud clanging on the bars of their enclosure. A familiar voice was screeching, "Hey, you lot! Wake up! I've got something to say to you!" The voice belonged to Theo, who, at some considerable risk to himself, had climbed back into his old zoo to speak to his former comrades in the monkey enclosure. "Hey, look! It's that criminal we used to know!" screeched one of the grey-hair monkeys. The younger ones gathered around and beat their chests at him. "Yeah, call the night keepers!" called out another. "Who are you saying is criminal?" demanded Theo. "You lot are the ones who go around robbing trains!" He had to shout to be heard, and the monkey commotion did not die down until Fuchsius, the oldest and the wisest of the apes, was fully awake. He climbed up onto the highest rock. "You younger monkeys would do well to listen to what Theo has to say," he proclaimed. "Show him courtesy and quieten down." "Thank you, wise one," called back Theo. He stood on his hind legs and summoned up as much dignity as he could muster. "I have come here to plead with all the monkeys who live in the zoo to stop helping Mr. Grabber in his criminal exploits. When he asks you to go on an adventure outside the zoo, you must realize that he is never up to any good. He is feathering his own nest, and the good name of monkeys is being besmirched in the human world. They think that we are evolving into a species of criminals. You must not feed this dangerous idea." Somebody was about to throw a banana skin at Theo, but Fuchsius caught his eye, and he quietly dropped it. "Theo is right," declared Fuchsius. "No good will come of taking part in bad enterprises." Some of the younger monkeys said Theo was a liar, and said that he was a criminal who did not like competition on his patch. They traded insults like "thief" and "parasite" and "human pet," which is one of the worst things you can say to a monkey. When Theo left, he was not very optimistic that he had managed to win anyone over to his side. But he underestimated his powers of persuasion. Most of the monkeys were honest at heart and felt ashamed that they had been used by Mr. Grabber to further his criminal aims. Theo thought he was dreaming when, in the middle of the night, he heard the nearby trees full of chattering and gibbering. "I am back in the zoo," he said to himself in his sleep. Eventually, he opened his eyes and looked out from his treehouse. The branches were alive with long-armed forms. "Ah! I'm under attack," he thought as he stuck his head out of his lair. He called out, "Listen, you lot! I'll go down fighting, and I'll take some of you with me, so say your prayers!" "Oh, ah!" replied the voice of Constantine, who was their leader. "We come in peace to join your gang." "My gang?" exclaimed Theo. "It's a gang of one, and I like it that way." "You know the law of the great family of apes. We're all brothers, and we help one another." "Sure," said Theo. "I'll help pick fleas out of your hair, but when it comes to staying one step ahead of the cops, there's no safety in numbers. It's best to lie low and keep quiet. I don't see you lot doing that. Now buzz off and leave me alone. I've been a free monkey for over a year, and the last thing I need is for dog walkers to see you lot hanging out in the trees. Get back to the zoo before anyone notices you're missing. That's my advice." But as the monkeys were deaf to his words of wisdom, Theo decided that he himself must leave. While it was still dark, he ran across the park to the streets and climbed up onto the rooftops of the city. "Where shall I go?" he thought to himself. He stood up on his hind legs and surveyed urban scene. The sun was rising, and the early morning traffic was starting to rumble. The biggest building he could see was the railway terminus, and he thought to himself, "That's where I will go." He climbed up some scaffolding at the back of the station. From the clock tower he could see thousands of commuters pouring out into the city centre. A few people spotted his apish silhouette on the skyline. Not everyone had the same thought. There were those whose reaction was, "There's that scary criminal, why can't the cops catch him?" And there were other more subversive souls who instinctively felt that the powers of the land were using him as an excuse for their own failings. "Good on you, monkey," they thought. "You've given us plenty of laughs. Long may you keep your freedom!" A train official called both the police and the fire brigade, but before they arrived he had already climbed down onto one of the little covers above the platform and from there onto a train as it left the station. He clung to the top of a carriage until he reached a stop called Burbington Woods, which sounded like a promising place to set up his new hideaway. Indeed, he had arrived in a village built on the edge of a pleasant enough wood. In the thickest part of the trees he found some tall branches where no human would spot him, and no dog would smell his scent. The only possession he had brought with him was his radio. He listened to some music before falling into a doze. Eventually he was woken up by the pips for the midday news. Beep, 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 beep. Hello, this is the news at midday. The chief of police has issued a statement saying that the fugitive ape known as Theo has been apprehended and taken into custody along with his criminal gang. More establishment lies, thought Theo to himself, before realising, oh, I see. They've rounded up the monkeys in the park, and they think one of them is me. He thanked his animal instinct, which had prompted him to move on. And Theo thought to himself, phew, that was a lucky escape. And that was the story of the great monkey robbery. I wonder what Theo will do next. Now he has to leave the big city.